Anyone ever heard of Facebook? I'm not sure if you heard of Facebook. So what, Loren, what do you do with the team? I know that Facebook works in teams.
Yeah, so I led the development of the most recent app that we launched called Messenger Kids.
It's, yeah, Messenger Kids. It's not Facebook, is it? And if you're using Facebook now, how many people use Facebook now? You're already using Messenger, probably, which means that if you have kids, if you raise your hand again, they're already sort of opting in, right? And that's one of the pieces of genius, I think, of Messenger Kids. I'll let you tell us more about it.
Sounds good. I have the unenviable job of being between you and lunch, and also following a guy who talks about holograms and ray guns. But that's like the very, very big feature, clicker. But I think one of the things that we've tried to tackle is what's going on now. Like what's going on with trends with kids and families and how are they using technology. So that may be the far out future, but if we look at where Messenger Kids came from, kids are using technology right now. When we look, especially in the last several years, we see kind of this skyrocketing use where 10 years ago, you didn't have a lot of device usage by kids, but just through looking at patterns, we've seen that adoption has been fairly rapid. And they're using this on their own increasingly. And I think parents right now kind of have this love-hate relationship with it. They want to get their kids into it, not just because, we hear about the digital babysitters, but when we talked with families, we found it was more than that, right? Parents are recognizing that we're moving into a new world, and they don't want their kids left behind. So there's a lot of like, how do I make sure that my kid is prepared for this new world? So a lot of this, you've got the love-hate with the devices, you've got the devices actually getting into their hands. How do we sort through all of that with families and figure out what are their needs? We worked with the PTA to go out and do more research by asking questions, and we found that in addition to just using digital devices, they're using them to communicate now. And these are kids, and they're using different apps that really are built for adults. Not specifically for adults, but they're not designed from the ground up for kids. And in this particular case, they're using them to connect with family and with close friends. And here's where we get to the point, right? So these things are actually getting into kids' hands. Parents are giving it to their kids, but the parents have this uneasy relationship. And they know that this is happening, but they want some sense of control and transparency. It's not just control, they actually want to understand what's going on. One of the themes that we've heard so far is that parents feel a little bit like the world is getting away from them. And how do they understand? In some cases, when we worked with families, we'd see kids teaching their parents about things. And so how do parents get more involved? And so together, parents and their kids as families can start moving into kind of this new world. We've done a lot of work, Facebook, I'll gloss over this quickly, but we have done a lot of work up until now, even before we started looking specifically at software for kids. We've done work about how to make sure families can negotiate kind of what goes on with Facebook and its whole family of products. We've created a parent portal in the last year to help parents start to have conversations with kids about the digital world and the new world. And we also started an advisory committee because we knew that when we were looking at kids, this is a new area for Facebook. We hadn't actually looked into this before, and we knew that we would probably have to depend on people that have spent a lot of time here, experts that have been studying this, and both in the industry and in academia. And so we put together this advisory committee, pulling from folks that have worked on Sesame Street, or from the Fred Rogers Institute, or the Family Online Safety Initiative. So these have really been helpful people in having repeated conversations to understand like where we would guide this product. So really it's twofold. One was going out to families and talking with families to understand their needs, and then one was talking with experts to understand. And we did a lot of this stuff before we designed a single line of code or designed a single screen. This is actually going out across the US to talk with Roundtables. In addition to Roundtables, we found one of the things that was most helpful was going to where families and kids are in their own natural environment. You can bring kids into labs, But in a lab for 2 hours, that ends up being a really constrained environment. They can kind of touch your app and then go, and that's all the learning you get. But by being invited into people's homes or into schools and being able to spend like 2 weeks, for example, with a third grade classroom, you end up learning a lot more about, okay, great, that app was great on day 1, but by day 4, here's where things broke down, right? By day 7, this is where parents started to have concerns. And that was super helpful for us to understand, what do families want, what do families stick with, and what do families have concerns about over a longer period of time. So I'll run through Messenger Kids, what it is as a product. But one of the things I hope to do is at each stage, I'll talk about kind of what we learned and how that folded into the product to make this more interesting about kind of what we learned. So this is a quick overview. It's a standalone app. What we found is that with kids, tablets constitutes about 66 to 75% of their usage versus phones. This is really before age 10 or 11 when most kids in the US get their first phone. The parents are really in control of the whole experience. They have to set up the child account, so the child cannot set up their own account, and they have control over anyone that the child talks to. The contact requests from the child are initiated either by child or parent, but they're approved by the parent, and both parents have to approve this contact request. The kids use Messenger Kids, but parents and other family members just use the messenger that they're used to. And this was key because trying to figure out how grandparents would learn like Messenger Kids would be challenging. One thing we found as well that was super important, and we haven't achieved it yet, is that cross-platform is critical, especially in a communications product. We're already hearing right now, we've launched iOS, but we've already started hearing from families, oh, it's really a bummer. My kid wants to communicate with other kids, but they don't have an iOS device, they have an Android. And so we're actively working on Android, and actually we just launched Amazon Fire this morning at 10 a.m. And that's really exciting because when you look at kids, the Amazon Fire, their tablet, you can get one for $50. And that's great in terms of like the kid being able to have their baby steps into entering this world. So we wanted to make sure we enabled them to be able to connect. And then there are no ads, there are no in-app purchases, and the app is free to download. So let's dive a little bit deeper into each of these. The key features here are that you've got video chat, both one-on-one, and they can do it in a group. You've got messaging, camera, and creative tools. And then there's just a lot of creative tools and kind of fun things within the app. So let's dive into each of those. The kids, when they start the app, they start on a home screen. And this is a critical decision. And we had a lot of discussions back and forth, because if you start it in a camera with all sorts of masks and so on, sure, it's really fun for kids, right? We know that any kid picks up a lot of these apps where you can put masks on. They'll sit there and they'll play forever with the masks. But it's not what we were looking to build with our product, right? With Messenger Kids, we were really looking to build a communications app. And so we forewent starting in a camera. Instead, we started in a home screen so the kid can immediately see where they fit in. They land on the home screen and they see their friends and their families around them. And they see groups that they can participate in that are having conversations. From the home screen, though, that we knew that the magic moment from just putting this prototypes and different ideas in the hands of kids is video chat. And the reason is kids are not only visual, that's pretty obvious. They're not going to sit there and type out a bunch of stuff, but they're immediate. And so asynchronous messaging worked less effectively. Whereas I might send a message to a friend, and then 2 hours later they respond, and half an hour later I respond, and we can have an active conversation that way. Kids just didn't gravitate as much to that because they're just much more immediate in terms of their time horizon. And so video chat real time ended up being the thing that really kind of the kids giggled and laughed over and they were engaged by. And then within video chat, of course, we've got things like masks, and we've got these things called sound emojis, where for those that have used Messenger, you can go and click on things and you can do a quick emoji, but this one puts a mask on them that actually turns into the emoji. And then last of all, for the times that they cannot connect with each other, or especially when they're connecting with family, and we found with parents, we wanted to include some sort of messaging. But because it's kids, with the messaging, we have stickers and frames and drawing and all the fun stuff that kids expect. All of the product is really built upon like a ground up camera that we built from scratch. And this is important. When we went into this, we actually wanted to make sure we weren't taking the Messenger product and just shaving a corner off here and splashing a little color there. We started from scratch with the research that we had done and with a dedicated art team that was built for just our team. And they went in to figure out if we were starting from scratch, when we look at the information architecture, when we look at the navigation, when we look to see what pillars we would have and how they weave together, how do we build this for kids and families? I mean, the camera's a really good example of that. All of the art, all of the effects has been created from the ground up by our art team. There's some small like inclusion of, for example, GIFs. We don't come with all the GIFs ourselves, but all the GIFs have been cut, like hand screened to make sure they're appropriate for kids. We've also been fortunate to work with a few partners, and we've been able to put light educational elements. But the educational elements aren't things where we put pages of textbook material. This crowd knows more than anyone that you need to make it somehow engaging. So in this particular case, we work the World Wildlife Fund, where the kids can kind of put on their scuba masks, they can see themselves in the scuba masks, and they flip it around, then they can start wandering. They just turn it around, and they can start finding animals and learning about the animals. So we get to the parent side of it. We knew that we needed to make it fun for kids, but also that parents were interested in really engaging with their kids as they went into this whole experience. So first they have to start the experience themselves. They would download the Messenger Kids app to their tablet, to the child's tablet. And then the second screen here, we do authorize the parent to make sure that the kid cannot create the account themselves. So we use a Facebook authentication for that, but it does not log the kid in, because I don't know about you, I would never log my 9-year-old into my Facebook account and just let her have at it. And then it doesn't create a Facebook account for them either. The other expensive decision that we made, but we felt it was really necessary, is that the Facebook accounts and Messenger accounts are not created for the child. What we create for the child is something completely separate in the system that had never existed before, so that it's always kept in a very separate space, and it's never kind of pulled in for any other reason. They created an account for the child just by putting in first name, last name. Again, this came from hearing from families, hey, I don't want to put in a bunch of information. I want to try this out and get my kid on there without being able to put in too much information. And then finally, they go and they add friends and family. They're in control from their own app, so they don't have to download the Messenger Kids app. They've got their Facebook app. And this, again, parents are like, I don't want to have to learn a ton of things. Show me what's familiar and use that to help me understand what's going on. And so within Facebook, they have a permanent bookmark called Messenger Kids Control. And from there, they have kind of almost a screen for each kid. And they can understand for each kid, which contacts do they have? Are there any requests coming in that I need to approve? And then, if I want to, I can remove any of their contacts that I just don't feel comfortable with. And if they remove the contact here, this is important that the kid cannot go and re-add that contact, because every contact that they request from their parent has to be approved by the parent. I think the big summary of this is like, let me actually see. So we learned a ton of things. This was a new area for Facebook to go into. And so that's why we did so much research before going into it and talking with so many different families. So I did actually, in summary, like try to think of if I had to summarize 3 different things that we learned. One, I mean, the first thing just to start off is that technology and communications is happening. Like that's not something we can reverse, and it's figuring out how we, in this new world, bring families into it in a way that all of them can participate and kind of work with each other. But I think on that path, one was keep everyone in mind. So on the team, we're lucky because we do have we have a lot of people on the team that are parents. So I have Luna, a 9-year-old, Callan, a 6-year-old, and Taya, a 4-year-old. But one of the things we said over and over was, do not think about your kids as you're developing this. Look, we all work at Facebook. We all have fast connections, great devices. We have, good educational systems. But if we want to design for what Facebook wanted to design for, which was the United States, we needed to go across and talk with lots of people. So we talked with single mothers that, were trying to figure out how am I going to parent my 2 or 3 kids. We talked with military families. We talked with parents where, they work a night shift. And talking with them and understanding their stories, we were able to build better product. 2 was really step into kids' shoes, right? So, and this is, we say this, but it's harder to do than you would imagine. And one of the key things is this stuff is changing so fast that almost if your research comes back, or if you're looking at what kids like, and you have this like gut reaction like, oh, that looks terrible, that's a good thing, right? Like, so I would regularly test kind of when art came back, would say like, this is actually what resonates with kids. That's good, like trust that rather than trusting your own instinct of what it is. Initially, when we designed Messenger Kids, it was too kid-like. We designed it for what we thought kids would want, and we really ended up designing for a much younger age. And so it was really trusting kind of the research and the art. And I think the last one is just focus. Like understanding that when we are designing for families and for kids, there's just the temptation, there's so many different things, there's so many different ways you can help families and kids, that it was focusing down and saying, like, if we are a communications app, how do we build it to be really about communications and bring the whole family along? So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Now I'll let people get off to lunch.